Well, it is that time once again to take a trip into outer space, the 43rd century to be exact, to take a look at the second release as a part of the TorchwOOD trilogy from the Big Finish TorchwOOD monthly range. In today's review, the brilliantly titled Oddunit, as written by James Goss. This release is available to order now on the Big Finish website on both physical CD and digital download formats, and can also be purchased as part of a bundle alongside the most recent Big Finish audio drama releases, including the entirety of this Ood trilogy. So previously on the Host Productions, I have already reviewed the first instalment of this trilogy, being Odyssey, seeing the return of Claire Rushbrook as Ida Scott as she ventures to a rather unusual part of space called Faber to meet up with her ill father. Now, despite this being a part of a series, all three of the episodes within this range are standalone, so you can enjoy them independently of each other, which is excellent, although it is worth noting that this is the second episode to see the return of Zachary Cross-Flane within the TorchwOOD genre, the first of which being Empire of Shadows, released a few years ago. Before we get into the actual story itself, I would just like to compliment the excellent cover artwork as created by Sean Longmoor. Once again, a really lovely, spacey, vibrant piece, incredibly eye-catching. And we also have the return of Bethany Weimers directing this one. The producer, as well as the writer, is James Goss. The script editor is Tim Foley, with music by Blair Moat. And again, the production on this story feels really nice and satisfying to listen to. Well then, Oddunit? That is the question, and to start off with, what a brilliant title. As I've already mentioned, it is possibly one of the funniest Big Finish titles that have been released in quite some time. So Zachary Cross-Flane and Chloe arrive on behalf of the TorchwOOD archive to investigate Paragliss 4. After getting a tip-off, then Ood has been killed, but who is the murderer? As the title suggests, it's a murder mystery right in the heart of the Empire within the 43rd century, and I felt really at home with this story. As I mentioned within my previous review of Odyssey, I wasn't entirely taken by that release. I did enjoy many aspects of the narrative itself, but the final product left me feeling rather uncertain, despite me listening to it multiple times. To its credit, I definitely say Odyssey was more out there and different compared to Oddunit, so if you're wanting a more experimental story that's a bit more sciencey, then definitely go and check out that episode. But on the day of listening to this release, I really enjoyed that this episode was familiar. It was a nice comfort blanket. And I think that just goes to show that different days and different emotions, it kind of caters to the type of Big Finish audio drama experience that you're looking for. Sometimes you just want something very comforting and familiar. Very much like the previous story, Blair Moat does a great job scoring this episode. There's lots of themes borrowed from many other TorchwOOD releases, which really build on that sense of identity that this series has had essentially since its very beginning, but also with that hint of spaciness in there as well, feeling very futuristic and unique compared to the other TorchwOOD Earthbound stories. The little subtle suggestions to tones and rhythms are also very similar to the likes seen within the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit within Doctor Who, of course the debut of the Ood, so that was really appreciated, whilst also creating a nice thematic design which connects this episode to the previous story within the range as well. And it's also nice to hear that within this episode we have the regular TorchwOOD theme bookending the beginning as well as the end of this story, which gives it a nice sense of identity. Yes, we're in the far, far future, but this is still TorchwOOD. Especially within this release, I do feel like it builds on that fear of the Ood. Zachary Cross-Flane is still dealing with the repercussions of Sanctuary Base 6, and of course Satan himself essentially possessing the Ood. I think that is woven into the events of this plot really effectively. It pushes the mystery forward whilst also providing for one of my favourite scenes within the entirety of the story. Zachary is locked in a room with the Ood, similar to Donna within the shipping container in Planet of the Ood, except this time the Ood are simply just stood around, albeit in the dark, which is a little bit weird. And the Ood naturally are a little bit curious as to why Zachary is in their home. Silas Carlson's performance here is really chilling, as the Ood's voice is simply so calm and soothing, which is something that I've already mentioned within previous Big Finish Ood-themed releases. Humans display all this emotion and energy, whilst the Ood remain static. They ask all the questions you ideally don't really want the answers to, and they are very curious creatures, but as always, they are so keen to help and serve. It's this curiosity and helpfulness twinned with the eerily polite voices which make every sentence feel as if it almost has a double meaning. It sounds like a compliment, it sounds like they're being helpful, but also at the same time it sounds a tad sinister and threatening. So I do think that this scene is superbly acted by Sean Parks and Silas Carlson, but equally it's incredibly well written by James Goss. I feel like he understands the Ood as creatures.
Can't see, but I think there's no Ood here.
You are incorrect.
You may have heard at the very end of that clip there that slight small sound, and that is the sound of the Ood's eyes blinking, which is a little tiny thing. It was used within the previous story as well. I think it really helps to capture that visual element of the Ood on screen, but within the audio drama format. It really brings them to life, and it's a really subtle thing, but it's really effective. The scene that I was just mentioning is also very early on into the story, so it definitely sets the mood for me for the rest of the episode. Zachary works really well as that lead character, as he's also vulnerable. He has these flaws, he's got this fear of the Ood, while simultaneously that duty to represent the Torchwood archive that I feel like at this point within space and time is kind of an organisation there to watch over good. It's a bit like a murder mystery, they're kind of there to solve problems, but I feel like perhaps some of that corruption has now been taken away, and it's a bit more of a charitable cause. I suppose at this point it's the Empire doing the bad stuff. Chloe really adds something to this story. She's a synth, and she rubs Zachary up the wrong way. A determined investigator, perfect for a murder mystery, but also very polished. She's incredibly intelligent and very slick, and I think that that can get frustrating at times. Again, she's one of those characters that asks all the questions that you don't really want to be asked within that moment, and whilst she can be irritating at times because she's always so to the point, she's also quite enjoyable. I think that Chloe does also help to really develop this futuristic world that the Torchwood archive inhabits. The narrative does a rather good job of adding extra levels to her dynamic with Zachary, as it's also worth noting that Chloe was also present within Zachary's previous debut story within Big Finish, being of course Empire of Shadows. So what I already like is this era of Torchwood is starting to develop, it's starting to create itself within these individual main range releases, which, let's face it, is where all good Torchwood spin-offs start. I refer you to the likes of Ghost Mission and Goodbye Piccadilly for the likes of Norton Folgate, then expanding out into the continuation series and Torchwood Soho. So talking about the narrative itself, an Ood has been murdered doing its job within the Paragolis 4 recycling plant, which takes care of the Empire's junk. There is multiple references throughout this story to the Empire's history, really building on this environment, whilst also making the days of Earth feel so distant. Mr. Brackhow and Lady Drogbra bring the working environment to life. Drogbra being this rich leader in her comfortable house with blended tea and an Ood butler for company, overseeing quite literally the rubbish below. Meanwhile, Brackhow is this hard human worker. His world is all about physical labour and doesn't want anything to disrupt that. And naturally, when there is this disruption, such as new things coming to his workplace or technological developments, he is determined to continue work the way that he knows it, as he knows best. And as you would expect, this old-fashioned type attitude of character does not trust the Ood one bit, believing humans should do the job instead, and in fact he thinks the Ood are the ones to blame for the murder. Of course, I did compliment Odyssey for its use of the Ood and the way that it didn't rely on something like Red Eye to stir the narrative forward, because we've done that with the Ood already, so what's the point in repetition? We've had possession before, so let's do something different, such as the previous story using psychic abilities. I feel like this episode kind of delves into the nitty-gritty of what makes an Ood. They are serving creatures, of course they want to serve people, but then equally at the same time, where is their role within this system? What happens when they are working alongside humans? I think that it's really interesting seeing how the employment rights kind of differ between the humans and the Ood, but also the dynamics between these two workforces. And I do think that is something that this story may have benefited from. Of course, we do have a number of people within the cast, but I think it would have been helpful if we had just a few side characters in there. We do get the odd glimpse of a worker every so often that isn't one of the main characters, but just having the odd worker come in, say the odd thing about the work, maybe how much they hate it or something like that, just to give the impression that this recycling plant is alive. I mean, at the minute it has been postponed due to the murder mystery taking place, but it would have just been nice to maybe see a few interviews with some of the employees, just to bring this recycling environment to life a little bit more, and to make it feel like an actual functioning, working environment, rather than focusing entirely on those main protagonists. It would have just brought the story alive a little bit more, because at the minute it kind of feels like everyone else has gone home. And I don't really want to say too much, but I do like the way, again, that this story also utilises the Ood's personality in a different way to what we've seen on screen. It does something different with the Ood, which is in turn refreshing, but also I like how the episode relies on not only Ood traits, but also a few Torchwood traits as well, to really make the story an enjoyable listen. It kind of rehashes the old, but then brings in something new.
Are we standing too close?
No, it's fine. I'm Zachary Crossflame of the Torchwood Archive.
James Goss has really tied the whole idea of employment rights, unions, and corporate hierarchy into the core of this narrative. It's really effective. Despite this episode being in the distant future, it also creates that environment. Humans finding their place within the Empire and the brutal development of decision-making, rendering roles that humans carry out completely useless, which, let's face it, we see in life today. I think this whole aspect of the story gives the episode that sense of purpose and identity, portraying this very specific aspect of Empire life, which in turn engaged me as a listener, arguably more than Odyssey. However, much like Odyssey, the Ood's role within the story is smaller than you may expect. Being within that servant role, they naturally fall into the background. But I think Oddunit handles that a lot more effectively than Odyssey, as every time they are present, the story uses many of the Ood's strengths to its advantage. There is also that higher sense of stakes and danger. The threat feels a little bit more harsh, a little bit more real. Say the methods of disposing the people who know too much about the murder are a little bit more threatening, which, although again this is a part of the Torchwood genre and there is that warning on the website, there isn't really anything within this episode that I would class as adult material that isn't suitable for the younger listeners. It's kind of just a more sinister story. It kind of treads that very fine line between Doctor Who and Torchwood. And I think that this effectively calls back to those darker, more gritty themes that I associate with the Torchwood genre. But it's not absolutely going to that level of darkness that we see in the likes of Corpse Day and The Hope or Dissected. So there we go, that is Torchwood Oddunit, as written by James Goss. And to be honest, I've needed to really try throughout this review not to make a joke out of that title. I've limited myself to a few, so yes, be proud of me for that. But this is an excellent story. I really did enjoy this one. I wouldn't say it's a highlight within the Torchwood main range. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say it's an enjoyable episode. And if you're looking for that nice bridge between Doctor Who and Torchwood, then this is a really good episode to try out. I prefer this story to Odyssey, but I respect what Odyssey did. I think it was very experimental and sciencey. This episode is just a bit more comforting and closer to home, whilst also absolutely selling the Ood as this creature that can do lovely, polite, calm, soothing, but also deadly, threatening, terrifying, and everything in between. So thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for reviews and reaction to the latest Big Finish audio drama releases from around the Whoniverse, and do of course stay tuned as well for the third and final review as a part of this series within December 2023, as that is right, we're nearly at the end of the year already, as I take a look at Torchwood Oracle. But until then, have a nice day. I shall of course see you all next time.